off topic, but have you seen Gladiator 2 yet? Nick's a big movie guy. What did you think about it?
Set pieces were cool. Too many characters, too many moving parts.
Yeah.
It just kind of felt like it was a bit bloated from like what the original one was,
Yeah.
and didn't really make me feel like I think a lot of movies have this issue these days about like the Skywalker effect, where every sequel has to be related to like the family
Oh,
of the
yeah,
first
yeah.
one. And I feel like the cool thing about Gladiator was that it was like, just a general, like that was the reason, like he was a man of the people. And the fact that then they had to tie Paul, sorry, this is spoilers. Have you guys both seen it?
I've seen it.
I've seen it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Tying Paul Mescal's character to Russell Crowe and being like, they're related. And like, I think it almost would have been nicer just to have like the legacy of Maximus lead a new group of people, but
Yeah.
that
Yeah, I
doesn't
thought
sell.
it was, yeah. I didn't think it was the best. I don't know. Like a lot of it was, even the start, I was like questioning when like his wife went into battle and died. I was like, what? I mean, why is she fighting? Like, this is weird. And then she dies. And then like, I don't know. And then, yeah, it was, I don't know. I guess I think that's a good point on too many characters. I thought it was just like Pedro Pascal was just kind of like a pointless character. It was like, why are you even like building him up? If it's just like I don't know. He didn't really serve any purpose. He was like a good guy, and then just died. You're like, okay.
I liked the one thing I'll say about Pedro Pascal is his character was basically what if Maximus had said yes to being in charge of the army for Joaquin Phoenix at the start, and you got to see someone that was winning battles, but for what cost, and like, but they didn't give that enough time or really let those kind of like that nuance sink in, because then they had to cut to all these other characters, and then you have to establish two villains, but you have to establish a secret villain in Denzel Washington, and then also now what's her name, the former queen or princess or whatever her title is, also now has to have more depth to her. And so everyone's trying to get this depth, but then you actually are like limiting rounded characters.
I also didn't think his name is Paul Mescal. That's his name.
Yeah.
He wasn't quite jacked enough. Like that was like that. I needed to like believe that he would. I don't know. That was a complaint of mine. Like,
I mean, one of my highlights of like, because I watched Gladiator, the first one, like a few days before, with my family, and talking about like Russell Crowe, my highlight was like, what's cool? He's not like super jacked. He's just like
we went the opposite.
He's like the way that like Wolverine was in like the original X-Men, and now like I was happy that it wasn't Wolverine.
It's inflation of bodies. You need it. Like when Gladiator 1 came out, it was a different time. Now we need to be wowed.
Yeah.
Like the that healthcare CEO killer. You see that body? Wow.
We should have got him.
Wow. Like that's jaw-dropping stuff.
Luigi. R.I.P.
Yeah.
Or I guess he's still alive? Yeah.
Yeah, he's still alive, but we were talking about this. Do you think his life is like that much worse now? Though he's like, we're talking about his great body. Like it's not the
I think that matters.
Yeah, it's not like, and like there's like a decent portion of like the population is like, good. He's he's like the Joker, dude. Like so anyways.
He's Joker but shredded.
Imagine a hot Joker. That's not that bad. Yes, anyways. Well, I'm also back on Wednesday, so we should try and meet up, grab some food or something at some point.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on this like unnamed, very early form idea Taylor and I had. I guess we can provide a bit of like context. Like I know I texted a little bit to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean it's definitely not like a fully formed I don't even know like idea or not, but like I think, and Taylor definitely jump in, but like our thought was like both of us kind of work corporate jobs, but both of us kind of want to get more into the world of, you know, I wouldn't even call it like small business, but just like people who are creating and putting stuff out there and kind of trying to like monetize it to some extent to just kind of like meet people. So that's kind of I guess the very high level angle. And like right now we're kind of playing with some names, but we're thinking about going with like not quite ready. And like, it's just kind of the idea of like it's tough to launch stuff. It's tough to like put stuff out there. And usually when people do, it's at a point where they don't feel quite ready. And it's just like putting something out there. So I don't know, Taylor, if you want to add anything.
And I think originally we started with like Trying Our Best was our first name, and then we changed it. But it does seem like a lot of the content out there is geared to either people who want to go like raising millions of dollars for a VC fund, or like very corporate or very like serious. So we were trying to find independent artists, people who are creating stuff, and just because that whole process is, there's not a lot that we've seen. And so we're just trying to create stuff. And then we're like, why don't we just record ourselves trying stuff? And then our podcast, we just started and we've just been recording episodes, and even just figuring out the technical issues has been a learning experience. So
I used to have a podcast.
Learn as you go.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I used to have a movie podcast with a friend of mine. Her and I did like about probably 30 episodes or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
But I was also in charge of like the audio, like editing and everything like that. And like there were times where we did like lose a couple episodes just from technical glitches and like, you know, but also I think it was also in a weird time when I was like, just kind of coming off of like my Twitter high of like hitting so many followers and being like, oh shit, I could just create a podcast and people will listen to it. And then I realized, oh no, you have to give them a reason to listen to this. Like they weren't like listening in droves, which kind of bummed me out. And then my whole like anxiety of it all just kind of tumbling down. And we were doing like 2 movies a week.
Oh yeah,
which was tough to do, to like A, find time to watch, then B, find time to actually meet up and record.
Yeah.
And so even then it was like kind of difficult to keep that schedule going. And then once you break that schedule, it became even more difficult to like restart or So it only lasted about a year and a half, I think.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I didn't realize that. Yeah. And like, I think, we kind of talked about it, that like our thought is we'll try and like record a bunch of episodes, get better at it, eventually have a bit of a backlog, and then and kind of using it as perhaps like an avenue to hopefully, you know, just meet other people who are kind of in the same world. So yeah, that's kind of the very high level, very primitive idea that we have right now. So we're just kind of going with it.
I'm curious what Steven told you to get you on here. Did he even tell you what this is?
Yeah, he gave me a spiel.
Okay.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't really need a reason to talk about myself. I'll keep going, and like, I mean,
we're on hour 8, Nick.
Yeah. Where that was one of the reasons why I wanted a podcast in the first place, was just to talk. So I get it.
The year was 1992. I was born.
That was the year I was born.
Yeah, that's funny.
Is that where we're starting?
Yeah.
It was a hospital in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Saskatoon? Yeah, but there's a lot of spit takes. That's kind of my thing that I'm going with.
Oh, it's cool.
We lose a lot of audio files. This is my 3rd laptop this week. Yeah, I mean, so we already like hit record, so everything you've said has been recorded. So yeah, we kind of wrote down just a few questions, and we'll figure out like the editing. So like, not so concerned about like the flow. And I think I said like we have just been blurring faces to try and like keep it casual. Like it's not anonymous, but just like, I don't know. So maybe it's like a little less pressure or stress or whatever. Like we're kind of still just playing with it, but
Yeah, no problem. Are you guys thinking of doing like audio and video, or just like is it going to be a video thing or strictly audio?
I think we were starting audio, but we wanted to record video just because everything's going video nowadays.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's
even
an additional revenue source for a lot of podcasts. So now you can make profit off of views and then advertisements from that too.
Yeah. You had mentioned that you did you got an internship with Conan. Was that,
or there's something.
that
Was
right?
it Conan? I know
It
there was
wasn't
College
Conan.
Humor.
Now the problem is that
It wasn't Conan.
we're going to start off with Conan O'Brien, and then I'm going to be like, well, it was actually just The Daily Show and Seth Meyers.
Yeah, we might as well cut the podcast. I thought it was Conan.
I do have a good Conan story though. But,
okay, well, I mean, yes, I'd be very curious to hear about, because coming from Edmonton, how you even got in the world of interviewing and with even if it is just Seth Meyers, I'm still impressed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Let's start from the beginning. The biggest thing for me was Twitter. It's now, as everyone knows, at X, the everything app. But it used to be Twitter, and I was on it in the pretty early on. At least like within like, I just deleted my Twitter account. Officially, I had like up to a month of like, you say delete, and it's like, okay, but if you want it back, you have like 3 weeks to like decide. And like the 3 week cutoff is like last week, so it's like gone forever. But that hit, I think it was 14 years I was on Twitter.
Wow.
And so, yeah, starting in school, like I didn't know what it was I wanted to do when I was coming into university. Originally, I actually, I used to, it all kind of ties together in the end, but the main thing was that when I was in high school, I really loved to draw. I was always considered like the artist in like elementary and junior high. And junior high was like the first time I realized, oh, there was like better artists than me. Like it's one of those moments when you realize like everything was within your grade and you moved along those same people each year.
Yeah.
And so going into junior high and seeing like the other version of me and finding out that they were better than me at art, like kind of put it in perspective. But it didn't like sway me a lot. But then once I went to grade 10, I took art and I absolutely hated it. It was like nice that it was like they were trying to show like the fundamentals of it. Like, okay, you do your oils, you do like a big final project where you could kind of combine all the stuff that you learned. But I hated being graded on art. And I wish I could be like, it's because like everyone's art is unique and that you shouldn't be able to say like this is worth like 50%, 60%. I say that, but I think deep down part of me was also because I wasn't putting enough effort into it.
Yeah.
But I'll take it as like a meaning of like that my art teacher was just too critical of what art was and my art style didn't fit with that. I think it was more so just because I wasn't really applying myself. But it did push me off of art.
Yeah.
And so like by grade 11 and 12, I like stopped doing it. But I got really into architecture. My high school had like an architectural design studies program, and you were able to use like AutoCAD to like just design floor plans. But this is also kind of like the age of like Google SketchUp and like AutoCAD 3D was starting to arrive. So you could actually like sculpt in 3D on your computer.
Yeah.
And I would get like so ahead in my studies, like just being like, okay, well, this project's pretty much good to go. I have time to like waste. And so I started like modeling 3D stuff in like Google SketchUp. Like I remember making like an Iron Man arc reactor from like the movie. And I was like getting really into it. And it's one of those things where it's like, man, I really should have like kept up with those skills, because after like grade 12 I just stopped doing it. Like I feel like I could have been like actually like a pretty good like visual effects artist, and like especially like when Blender became to be, and like it was something I really enjoyed, but I did want to become an architect. And then there's like the local school here, NATE, the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology,
Yeah, yeah.
and I got accepted into their architectural design program. And I remember going to like the first day of like kind of like the orientation of like, this is what you could do if you decide to go here. And the person giving it, his whole job was just making the spindles in between like railings. And I was like, that sucks. Like that's not what I want to do. I want to build houses. And like the thing was, the program, you could become an architect. You could only sign off of something at a certain square footage. You would need to have like a professional degree, not just a diploma. So then I almost ended up going to Calgary has a master's program in architecture. Winnipeg actually has a bachelor's degree in architecture. So I was considering those, but it just still wasn't fitting. So it was like, well, maybe we'll see like how it goes. I'll just get into arts program, just start working on an arts degree and then see like where that goes. And then that actually led me to maybe wanting to become a teacher. And I really like the idea of becoming like that classic, like when you're no good at math and science, you're always like, I'll just become an English social studies teacher. Like it's just such a deep road. So I was going to do that. Started taking a bunch of education courses. And then right around then is when I started getting really into Twitter. And I was working on a blog with a friend that I went to high school with. And it was called Why We're Still Single. And it was just like the Tumblr age of like, you'd start writing a blog, and I wanted it to become like just this kind of treasure trove of like journaling of different dating experiences we were having, and like just like all the kind of things that I found like humorous about dating. And it was like people liked it. I think I always blew it up more in my head that people were like, yeah, I can't wait for like another post.
Yeah, yeah.
I think people were like, ah, it's kind of fun. It's kind of sad. These stories depressing. But it did get me like really into like writing. And that was when I started like pushing into like college humor, which is like one of I really loved Jake and Amir when I was
also
growing
like Jake
up.
and Amir, yeah.
I would watch all their videos. It just became something I would always kind of go to. And then, you follow along with all the other college humor kind of staples at that time. And I remember one of my friends had this idea, and I was like, I would like to do a flow chart because they had a couple like flow chart type articles. And I was like, it'd be a flow chart about like dating. It would be like, are you in the friend zone or in the end zone? And so my friend taught me how to use Photoshop, and I just started like using kind of the same structure I'd used in architecture of like, drawing floor plans and just using shapes.
Yeah.
But like I just did that for this whole flow chart. And I sent it in, and it ended up getting like 100,000 views like in the first day. And so like that was already just like hitting my ego, where I was like, heck yeah, like this is exactly what I like can do. So I started writing more articles for them. In the end, I only ended up doing like 6 or 7 articles.
Yeah.
But it was still like just exhilarating. Like it felt like I had this like sense of accomplishment, and I was like, okay, well, it's screw teaching. I'm going to become a writer. And the program I was in at it was MacEwan University, had just turned their communications program into a full degree program. So it used to be just like a journalism diploma, a communications diploma, and then they merged them and turned it into a communications degree. And so I applied for that, and I started like writing more, and I started doing some stuff for Funny or Die. And then the great thing is like Twitter just kind of kept introducing me into new people.
Yeah.
And like I started following different comedians and different writers all on there. And I ended up building up a following of that most I got to was 16,000 followers on Twitter. And it was great. And I was meeting like celebrities, like this is where it comes back to Conan. Was Andy Richter was one of the people I met and like would kind of keep up in conversation with. And then I would take like trips to New York and LA. I would just Like, I was still a cheap student, but I would just like keep an eye out for like the cheapest flights, and then I just sleep on my friends' couches from like New York and LA, and
Oh yeah.
it was like this cool vibe of like being like almost self-sufficient, like being this freelance writer. Um, and part of what ended up getting a lot of my attention on Twitter was that I would do doodles. So like it was actually the comic book Scott Pilgrim by Brian Lee O'Malley. I remember when that came out and I was like, oh, I love this style. And so I started like doodling kind of in my own way. And I would take people's jokes on Twitter and turn them into these like little sketches. And then they loved them because it was an additional publicity for their own joke,
Yeah.
and I would get the attention. And so I kind of built myself up on that. And then I was getting like a regular kind of like drawing gig where I was getting like paid to do it for like a website. And that was a lot of fun, just taking that same concept. Um, and then, yeah, I would go to LA, and the Conan story was that I got to like go backstage at Conan, and I've now done it like several times, and it's still nice every time that Andy Richter will come out and like talk to me and like acknowledge me as someone that he knows, and not just like someone that was like this young guy that was just kind of like mooching off of successful people.
Yeah.
And I remember Conan was saying goodbye to the band that was performing, and I was like, this is my chance. This is my chance to go talk to like who I consider like a comedy idol. And I'm standing behind him, and he's like just so tall, and like I'm like, okay, this is going to be it. And he turned around in such a way that he just like rotated around me, so he never actually made eye contact with me. And then he walked into his room, and I like walked up to like one of the producers, and I was like, is he gone now? And they're like, well, he's not gone, but he's probably won't be out for like another like hour and a half. And I was like, okay. And like when he did that turn, all that like left my mouth was just like a little like nothing came out. And I always still regret that, because now there's probably a chance I will never meet him, and that kind of slipped through my fingers. But it did give me like I got to go to like Simpsons table reads and
Oh
like
yeah.
Bob's Burgers table reads, and like you can kind of see like right over here there's just like two scripts that are signed by like the cast of the Simpsons, and like Matt Groening was at like one of the table reads. So like I got to like meet all these people that like I would have imagined they could have met, being
Yeah.
this like kid from Edmonton that had never been to like LA before, except for like a trip with his family to Disneyland. And now I was like, walking around like LA, like going to Silver Lake, a coffee shop, and like hanging out with people that, could have in actuality just killed me. But they ended up being very nice and very supportive. But it was through that for my program, I had to kind of have an internship. And the internships were, like all local based, but you could find your own. And so I started like reaching out to one of my friends that was just writing, had just started at Seth Meyers. Like the show was just about to begin its first season.
Yeah.
Um, and then also a friend that was writing for The Daily Show. And I managed to go through the interview process, like had to do my whole like cover letter, multiple interviews. And at the end, both shows turned to me and were like, yeah, we would love to have you as a writing intern. Um, like Seth Meyers gave me a choice. It was like a writing intern or a social media intern. Uh, Daily Show was just like, yeah, writing intern. And it's crazy because so many of those people end up going to write for the show. They end up doing so much more, because usually once you become an intern, you become a PA after, and then you become like a writer's assistant. Then you become like, it keeps going.
Yeah.
And this was like my chance. And I remember just like being so stoked about it. And then I had to start talking about like, okay, well, like, how are we going to do this? Like, I need a visa to be there. And they were like, oh, that's something we can't help you with. And according to them, it was like the Inclusion Act or something like that. Like they have to treat all interns completely the same, no preferential treatment. And getting a visa for someone on an internship would be considered preferential treatment. So they were like, "Are you able to discuss with like your school? Can we like make that happen?" And so I like
Yeah.
went to like my the kind of chairperson of the program at the time, and I was like, "This is the opportunities." And first off, they told me that they didn't have a TV, so they didn't know what those were, which I was like, "This is an uphill battle." Um, and then yeah, they said that they couldn't sign off on any like visa for me, so I was like just crushed.
So you had to
Um,
turn them down?
yeah, so that sucked. Um, and then College Humor, they were nice enough to be like, okay, well, we could try and make this work where like we pay you as a freelancer, not as an intern. So there's different rules for that. But then you could just happen to sit in on the intern meetings and it would just be the same thing. And then your school, which I you would be allowed to do, I could have just done a freelance internship and submitted the hours
Yeah.
and it all would have worked, but it still would have been like living in New York as a student, paying off of a like a intern like a freelancer wage
Yeah.
for like 2 months, and I was like, I can't afford to do that. Like
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
not going to. So it was one of those things that was like really crushing to me, and it made me like have to like rethink like what it was I wanted to do. I
Yeah.
ended up doing an internship at like an advertising agency and did copywriting for them.
Yeah.
And they ended up hiring me out of school. But that became like one of those things where like I also realized now looking back that if I really did want it, I would have kept up with it. Like it would have been something that I would have continued to try and push for and like send in scripts, send like keep trying to use those connections, and I just never really did it. And you just kind of get busy doing your own thing here, and it was trying to get like maintain jobs. Problem with communications jobs is they're always the first thing that gets like laid off when there
Yeah.
comes like the time to do that. So I kind of moved from one place to another, um, but I kept kind of telling jokes on Twitter. The difficulty was then kind of like staying a part of that. Like there was there was a big shift on Twitter, mostly kind of like it was I honestly probably the Trump years where you
Yeah.
start noticing that everyone was making the same jokes.
Like Saturday
Like
Night Live. Yeah.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
just became the same thing, and I like it was one of those things where I used to like Google like search on Twitter the jokes I was writing to see if anyone made a similar joke because I had like that pride in that. And then you just start realizing, oh, cool, everyone's doing this. It's now becoming like this monetized thing just to steal jokes. Nowadays on X, it's even worse because you can just steal a joke, get the actual payment from it if you're a verified account, and just that's a source of income for you. Like it just became, it was drying up. And even now, when I hear so many of my friends that were writers just being like, man, the job I once always dreamt of is no longer the job that like is there anymore. Like writers' rooms have gone smaller, AI becomes such a bigger thing. And like there was a good chance that, had it kind of gone in that direction, that job might not have been what I kind of had hoped for.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, my goal was to write for late night. I loved the idea of topical jokes, and it was just becoming this thing where the news just got worse and worse, and everyone was becoming more connected and more aligned with it. So people were making the same jokes, like, and then you felt like, should I even be joking about this when it was like at the cost of like people's rights and freedoms? And then you start getting really conflicted about that. So yeah, it became much more of a bummer to write, and I
Yeah.
just wasn't doing joke writing as much anymore. But what I started doing was kind of using that Photoshop that I had learned from my very first article to start drawing more. And I realized that a lot of my drawing was now a lot more architectural based, which was kind of came back from my high school training. And I started doing like you can kind of see behind me, but like I love movie posters, I love art, I love movies, and so I started just you watch one movie and you're like, I love this movie, and one of my big things is like turning my interest into something tangible,
Yeah.
something that kind of lasts. So like when I watch a movie, I'm looking at like how can I get the vinyl of this, like the soundtrack? How can I get like a poster of it so that when people like come on over, they know I like this? How do I get the Blu-ray of it? Like it became sort of that kind of obsession of like turning just my interest into something that I could put on a shelf or put
Yeah.
on a wall. And there were companies like Mondo, um, who was just like one of my all-time favorites. They were putting out movies or posters for like movies that I just absolutely loved, and you just got to see like the artist's interpretation and their style. And I was like, this is awesome. Like, could I do something like that? And so I started playing around with Photoshop, and uh, it was for a local theater here, Metro Cinema, the Garneau Theater.
Yeah.
They would do monthly movies, and they were looking at having volunteers do posters for them. And that was so similar to Mondo, because Mondo used to be for the Alamo Draft House in Austin, Texas. Anytime that they were playing a movie, they would reach out to one of their artists and they would put up this beautiful poster for it with like the date and time and everything. And this was on a smaller scale, but it was still something I was like super interested in. And so the first poster I ever ended up doing was for the Beatles documentary, 8 Days a Week. And it was just like, this would have been like 7 years ago, maybe. Um, it was still like kind of a minimalist driven thing where I was like, okay, well, it's going to be a white poster with like the bob cut of the Beatles. And that's going to be it. And it's going to be super cool and edgy. And I was trying to be like one of my favorite artists, Ollie Moss, he's like the master of simplicity when it comes to his posters. And it wasn't that, but it was like still cool to like be walking around Edmonton and then you see your poster like up on a wall and you're like, oh, that's so cool to see.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like my first posters were rough. Like there's a couple that I still sell to this day where I was like, okay, well, like that idea is still like it's a popular enough movie. I like the idea of the concept of the poster. Like I think the oldest one I still have up for sale is a Lost Boys poster where I like turned the entire title of the Lost Boys into like the what is it, like the is it Venice Beach that has it, the boardwalk with where it takes place, and I drew that and them hanging off the bridge, and it still sells to this day when I go to a market. But it was like, okay, this is like the oldest one because all the rest I don't even feel comfortable selling because the art was so rough, because I didn't have any training. Like I used to do art throughout junior high up to that point, and then it was doodles using just a pen and ink, and it was like a very simplistic type of style. And then it wasn't until I started kind of finding this style in Photoshop of taking these vectorized images and like realizing that you could just move shapes into different ways and add some shadows, and you could actually get like some cool imagery. And that led to starting to go to some markets and selling some of my posters, and that was awesome. It was cool to like see. It was rough at the first start because I think I had like maybe 5 posters for sale. I thought I needed some like local institutions, so I started drawing some of the movie theaters around Edmonton too, and
Yeah.
I'd sell those. And that was great, but I do remember just people walking by my booth and just like kind of taking a look and be like, oh, that's nice, and like keep walking. And I just kept up with it. And, you start learning some more shortcuts in Photoshop. I started learning about how to use texture work. I took finally a class that just was like a kind of an evening thing where I learned how to use Adobe Illustrator. And that was a big deal because I realized I could actually like draw in there first and then do lighting, shadow, and texture in Photoshop.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, for the past 7 years, I just have continued drawing movie posters now. I do like local fairs around Edmonton, sell my prints online, which, it's one of those things where I don't do enough work in promoting my online shop. Um, but sometimes it was easier when I was on Twitter because, I was dealing with a global audience.
Yeah.
So nice that people were kind of finding me. And now, without that, it has taken a step back from not being so online. But at the same time, locally, I've gotten to be so much more well known. Now I have, I think, like 52 posters or something like that. So when people walk by, they're like, excited to see me at this like fair, and they're like, "What's new? Like, what have you
Yeah.
been working on?" And then they're spending time like flipping through, like basically like no different than like going through like a vinyl shop and like trying to see like what's for sale. I
Yeah.
like that feeling so much better.
Yeah. Ah, that's very cool. So I
Long
mean,
story.
yeah. No. So you said it was 1992 you were born? No.
Yes.
But yeah. So I mean, it sounds
Okay, we
like
can go back to the start. Okay.
a cold day in Saskatoon. But yeah. So it sounds like you were putting stuff out in a lot of different mediums when it was Twitter or writing,
Yeah.
and then you shifted into art. So I guess, like, did you ever? I mean, I think everyone does to some extent, but was ever a big hurdle for you, like, the trepidation that comes with putting stuff out? Like when you started tweeting, when you submitted stuff to College Humor, when you started doing your art, was there ever like the phase where like you had it ready and you just hadn't put it out or anything like that? Or were you just someone who was comfortable with it from the start? Like what was the process like when you were starting each one of these endeavors, I guess? Was that something that you dealt with?
Yeah, I think if anything, it's kind of the opposite. I think I was almost too eager to always get something out. Like it would be
Yeah.
one of those things where I put it out too fast, and then I realized, oh, I want to change that, but now
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
out there, and I can't do that. So I've never really sat on anything where I'm like, this I don't want to share this. I think I've always been over eager to share, but then the stress comes after it. Like I
Yeah.
don't have that stress before. I have the stress after of like, how is this going to be interpreted? Is this going to be interpreted the way I thought it was going to be? Are people going to like it? Are people going to like me? Like even the other day at I just had a fair last weekend and the weekend before, and I misheard someone because they asked me, "Am I the artist?" And I thought I heard them say, "Am I a good artist?" And I was just like standing there and I was like, oh God, like all these thoughts washed over me. I just didn't know, like, well, I mean, art's so subjective. Like,
Flashback
What
to
do,
high school.
yeah,
yeah,
what do you think?
Teacher.
digital art is already kind of like this weird hot button issue for me because like there is AI art. And so one of the things I usually have to tell people is like the difference between like my art that I'm doing on a computer and the art that a computer is doing. And like there is a big separation of that, but like I still get very nervous being like in the presence of someone that I consider a traditional artist that is painting and like creating something with their hands, whereas I'm using a trackpad on my laptop. And that's one of the other things is like because it is all self-taught, like I still, to this day, from like the very first drawing I've done to the most recent one, it's still all done on my MacBook's trackpad. So it's just drawing with like my finger and a mouse. Like
Yeah.
even if I had a proper mouse, like that would be better. But like, I'm behind people that are doing like, full graphic pieces with like a stylus and a pen and everything, or even an iPad. Like Cintiq tablets. Like there's so many better ways to be a digital illustrator, and I'm still in this most like rudimentary form. But it's just something I've kind of taught how to do.
Yeah.
Or I've taught myself how to do, and now it's one of those things where I'm almost like scared and nervous to like try doing something else because at least I know people like what I have right now. I don't want to change that out of fear that it might not be something that people care for if I change up how I do it.
Yeah.
I do think that's interesting though, because it reminds me of, so I work in like the tech industry, so obviously
Mm-hmm.
work with a lot of developers and coding. And there is this mindset of like they're just so eager to try new things that it's kind of ridiculous, to be honest. It's like everyone's rebuilding tools to just do the
Mm-hmm.
thing. Whereas if we all just use the same tool, we'd all probably just build more stuff better.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of musicians where it's like the instruments are so simple. They haven't changed for a long time, and yet we continue to make new music. And it's really about the art. It's not about
Mm-hmm.
the instrument. I do kind of feel like with artists, especially like just like people get really focused on what brush you're using, what tools are you using, what are you doing, and it doesn't really matter. I'm curious if you would agree with that, or if that's like I do think there's
Yeah,
you become a master of like your tool, and it doesn't really matter so much that you're using the latest and greatest thing or what it is. It's more like you're actually becoming in tune with it to the point where you're able to create stuff that's the whole point of the tool, not the tool itself.
yeah, I think there's like, I mean, just the way that like if you use a stylus, you're able to kind of use pressure sensitive tips to like change the line weight and like turn your pencil to the side and get like a flatter line. Like you have so much more freedom. I almost do think that because I've almost put these like restrictions on myself of using like, this, I use this mouse pad like just on my laptop. Like I have to almost figure out, okay, this is an obstacle. Instead of just kind of looking for a new tool, I have to figure out how to overcome that obstacle with the tools I have, which I think is nice because then, it's kind of like people will tell me like it's crazy how much detail I have in a piece. And it's because like, well, because I'm drawing with my finger, I have to be so zoomed in on the piece that I can sweat those details. Whereas most people are dealing on a more macro level and not ever having to think about that way. And so like it's nice when you can kind of then turn it into a benefit. Like it does feel like this restriction, but then because I don't have to change so much, I can try and look at the innovation of my existing tools instead of like throwing those out and replacing them with something different.
Yeah. And when you were starting, you mentioned you were self-taught and you're just playing around.
Yeah.
And then you reached the point where you wanted to sell it. I'm curious because I can see like the posters behind you. You've got like a distinctive artistic style. How did you go about like cultivating it? Was it just trial and error? Or did you sort of start by looking at artists you admired and trying to copy them and then bringing out pieces that you liked? I'm curious how you
I
developed
definitely
that.
think part of it is just inspiration first and foremost. I think I don't know if there's that classic quote, but like, isn't it like great artists steal? And I feel like that was part of it of looking at, okay, these are some of my favorite artists. What are the things I like about this? And like, okay, like this artist deals with this, or like this one piece, like I could say like Matthew Woodson's Her piece that he did for Mondo. It's a poster I've always wanted to own, but it's like so old and like they didn't have a huge print run, so it's like difficult to find. But like the color palette of that just struck me so much that I ended up being like, okay, this is like how the feeling I want for a lot of my pieces. And then when I did a drawing of one of the movie theaters here in Edmonton, I was like, okay, well, like, what kind of color palette am I gonna use? And I ended up basically taking that same kind of like, okay, I love his baby blues, I love this orange, like let's see if what that could kind of look like together. And so I used that to kind of influence the color palette of this design. And then that led me down another path of like, okay, well, what else can I do with that? And there's again Ollie Moss. There's so many different artists where I was just like, I love the thought that went into this type of poster. How can I put that same thought into mine? So it is a lot of borrowing, but even just like not even just borrowing their artistic style, but just the way that they're thinking about a poster. Like, and I've always want to recommend her, but I can never get her last name right. Her name's Akiko, I believe, but she did like a poster for, you can look up her work. She did like the portrait of a lady on fire poster. Like she's done a whole bunch. And every time she does a poster, I'm just like, there's so much level of thought that went into this. It's not just a picture. There's like levels behind it. And that's always been my biggest thing. And now like I've done some posters for like some like short films that like have premiered at like South by Southwest. I recently did like one of my dreams was the Edmonton Folk Fest poster here. And each time when I go into those meetings and I'm talking, I'm like, I don't want to just give you a piece of like, I don't want to give you a picture. I want it to be a story. Like I want there to be levels to it where it's like, oh, it's not only this, but it's this. Like even one of my most recent ones, which I don't like, it shows a lot of skill, let's say, but it's not like a traditional poster, but it was for the movie Elf, where I was like, okay, well, what can I do to make this poster for Elf stand out? And I ended up basically taking the entire structure of the board game Candyland and turn that into the poster itself. So you could put that poster down on the ground, and if you had the Candyland cards, you could play along on that entire poster. And I liked the idea of like, oh, okay, it's not just a poster for Elf, but there's also this journey of Candyland. And it's like this childhood nostalgia, and it's like hitting on these notes that are explored in the movie, but then I also get to explore in the poster too.
Oh, that's super cool. You mentioned earlier too, when about architecture school, and when I think you
Mhm.
submitted to, was it College Humor, and you were talking about how you like scaffolded out the sort of
The
content.
flow chart, yeah.
Yeah. Do you still like, what's your approach? Do you still find you take principles that you learned from that and apply it to like your current work, or is that like, what's
Definitely.
your, yeah, yeah.
I mean, still, because, I'm not painting undercoats on a lot of these painting or like prints, I am still using vectorized shapes to build everything. So when I am drawing a person, I am using structurally circles, triangles, like different shapes to build it. And then once you start adding the lighting, shading, and texture, you're getting that 3D look and building from it. But like everything is starting off in blocks and just shapes. And so like even when I do like something of like my favorites, like I did a Spirited Away poster and I just got to draw the bathhouse of it. And that is straight architecture. Like that is just looking at the design and being like, okay, for this, I am just going to be drawing everything equal here. I'm going to be adding like some like elements here. Like it becomes architecture um, in movies. And there's like a series I'm still wanting to develop more, but like I drew like the house from Psycho, and I'm wanting to kind of explore architecture in movies more because I think there's so many iconic buildings and it just fits my style so well. But to this day, like, I still am just drawing a bunch of shapes of the same thing I was doing on a flow chart, but now putting them into something that actually looks pretty.
Yeah.
I think that's actually really cool. I could see that working. Do you find though, so you have ideas, how do you test your ideas to see what resonates with people? Do you just do what you like and just put it out there, or do you do rough, like very rough concepts and test them before you invest a lot of time? Because it sounds like these pieces are really time intensive.
They can be. I mean, sometimes a piece, if I have it, like I did a Parasite poster, and after I watched that movie, I like ran home and like it just took me a weekend to do because everything I did was falling into place. For me, honestly, most of the time, and it's usually a pain for when it comes to like client work because they'll ask me like, "Can you submit a sketch to us before you start any of the work?" And usually, since I'm not drawing it out on pen and paper, and I'm drawing it on like my laptop, the design is already like 50% of the way there by the time I send it over because it's no different than if I would be designing it already. The challenge is that when I'm trying to do this, I need to convince myself I believe in the idea first because there are times where like, okay, I know I want to do this poster, but I just don't have an idea. That's the longest hold for me. Like I feel like I'm just drawing like elements of stuff, like waiting for it to finally click. If I have the idea right away, where like, for instance, that Parasite one, where I was like, the movie's about them playing house essentially. So I was like, I will draw the house as a dollhouse and them as like little wooden blocks that would be played in the dollhouse. That is like, okay, that makes sense to me. Like, I know I can picture exactly how that's going to look. And then you start thinking, well, what else can I add? And I'm like, well, what if I added like cockroaches crawling over it because they're like the parasites? And I start adding like the additional layers to that. But then, like, say for like for Elf, even that took a while to think of Candyland. But like once I knew it was Candyland, I was like, okay, now it's just a matter of sitting down and drawing it out. But that initial hump, it's never usually like I'm talking with people. I'm more scared to kind of share that kind of stuff. I don't usually like to open up a bit too much about like this is what I'm thinking. Once I have that idea in my head, I'll be excited about it. There's times where I'm at a market and I'm talking about a piece I'm working on. I'm like, I can't wait to show this off. That is so much more exciting for me, but it's tough. I never want to like show my cards too much, especially since my style, sometimes there's like I have an idea in my head, like I have an idea for an Inside Llewyn Davis poster. and I can picture exactly how it's going to look, but there is a chance that my art style might not be able to actually achieve what I have pictured. And so that's going to be one of those ones that I get very nervous about, because there's a point where I'm just going to start drawing it, and then I'm going to realize this isn't what I want, and I'm going to have to back away. And it's been a long time since I backed away from a project, but it does happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess one question. Do you think you're a good artist? To follow up on that. No,
okay, well, let's go back to grade 10.
Yeah. I guess one question I had was, so obviously you have this new medium where you're putting stuff out, you're getting paid for the work you're doing.
Yep.
If you had to think of like, is there someone, it's easy to say like, oh, I want to be, a billionaire off my art or whatever, but is there someone who's like doing it on like a scale that you would, like, in an ideal world, say 5-10 years from now, that you'd be very happy to like be at their level, emulating what they're doing, and presumably like making a living off the art? I don't know if that's like the goal, but is there someone that like you can look to and be like, man, if I hit that in 5 years, I would be very happy?
I mean, there's a couple of those artists I name dropped before, but like it's one of those things where I've still always been hesitant. Like I don't like using the term like graphic designer, because I feel like, to me, graphic designer has always meant that you've kind of gone to school for that. So I've always used the term digital illustrator. And even then, there's always been a real big hesitation for me on wanting to do this for a living. And that's been a hurdle that I still haven't been able to kind of jump over yet.
Yeah.
Where I could be putting a lot more time into this. I could be trying that out, but I also don't want to come to resent my art. Like the nice thing is I can watch a movie and be like, I know exactly what I'm going to do for that. And then go home and just do that on the side. Like a lot of this was just built on the evenings and weekends of the jobs I've had.
Yeah.
But now if it's something like I'm sitting there and I'm trying to think of like, I need to have a new print, otherwise I can't afford to do this next week or next month or whatever, it becomes turning that art into something that is almost like currency.
Yeah.
And I'm almost like withholding it for myself. And I get nervous about that because that's something I've never had to do.
Yeah.
And I think like the last time I had my back up against the wall with like wanting to be like, I'm not going to try and find any other internships because I'm going to get a writing internship at a late night show, and accomplished it and then lost it because of something that was beyond my control. I don't want to ever be in that situation again. So I think I get nervous still about that, even though, my art's doing better and better every year. And like, I'm getting more opportunities. And like, even now I did the Folk Fest art last year. They've asked me to do it again this year.
Nice.
And so like getting that recognition of like, yeah, we liked working with you. Let's do it again. Like I'm in this position where I could start doing it full time, but I still get very nervous. And that's still going to be always like one thing I'm trying to overcome. There's still always that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And even, I look back at like 7 years of doing this and I'm like, should I be in a higher spot? Should I be further than I am? And I'll look back in another 10 years and be like, in that same place. Like, I think that's one of the things about art is you never are fully comfortable with it because it's always changing. Your interests are always changing. You're always trying to do more.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's totally fair. Taylor, do you have anything else?
We're going to get cut off in 4 minutes. So we switched to Google because Zoom has the premium paid feature. And just today it just popped up that I now can purchase a premium plan if I choose, but we don't have it yet. So we've got 4 minutes.
That's fine.
I guess you go too.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say you've done a lot of different mediums. Is there anything else that like you'd want to try? I remember one time you talked about like a hot dog restaurant to me, but I don't know if that's worth spending time on. But is there anything like, you've done jokes, you've done Twitter, you've done art. Like I know you're a big restaurant guy. Like you're a big movie guy? Is there anything else where you're like, that's what I would like to try next?
I mean, yeah, like I love food. Having my own restaurant, like the problem is I've always just been more of an idea guy. It's harder for me to put it into a lot of practice of
you're a big hot dog guy.
On it.
Yeah.
Which is funny because I'm not really, but I like the idea.
You love hot dogs.
But I don't know. For me, like I've I've always had this respect for traditional artists. And so part of it is trying to see if maybe I can take my art to actually learning and how to do screen printing and trying to get into a more kind of like, instead of it just feeling like, I'm printing off digital copies of the things I'm creating, doing something that feels like I'm putting intentional work into it and like coloring, layering, and like learning that process. That is something I'm wanting to learn next year. Sculpture is something I'm really wanting to play around with. There's
Nice.
a terrific artist named Brad Hill who does like these like pop culture based sculptures. And I think they're so cool. And I'm like, well, maybe I could take my love for movies and turn it into like a sculpture, like something tangible, because that is my interest. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like, I've always wanted to, like, I've done some short films with friends, but it's about trying to, like, just like with my posters, like, sometimes I do just need that idea. Like,
Yeah.
I've done an oil painting once, and it was because I had an idea for what this oil painting would look like.
Yeah.
I did it, and then I haven't ever had another idea for an oil painting, so I just never have gone back to it. Like, I
Yeah.
always need that inspiration first and then to act on it. So I
Well, I
guess
mean, it
it's just
sounds like,
always staying open to being inspired.
yeah. Well, you got some stuff. So that's everything I had, Taylor. I don't know.
Yeah, no, this is perfect timing because the call's ending in like 30
Yeah.
seconds. So this
Yeah.
was
So thanks.
great.
Yeah. Thanks a bunch.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
cool.
Sorry, I talk a lot.
No. It was good. It was good. Yeah. Really appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
this was awesome.
if you still ever need more, just feel free to reach out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Happy to
Of
always
course.
chat. But
Yeah. 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 I appreciate it, man. And we'll link up over Christmas here.